Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a fascinating corner of the global health and wellness market. It's one that's showing some quiet but, well, pretty significant growth.
Exactly. And we're basing this on a detailed market research report we've looked at. From cognitive market research, it focuses specifically on something called Smilagenin.
Right. So our mission here is to kind of unpack this report, pull out the key numbers, the regional dynamics, understand what's driving things, and figure out why this compound, myelogenin, why it's becoming more relevant, especially, it seems, in pharma and nutraceuticals.
Yeah, Smilagenin, it's a natural compound. You often find it sourced from plants. Sarsaparilla is a common one. And its potential is really starting to get, serious attention, both in research labs and, well, commercially too.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. What's the big picture globally according to this report? What are the headline numbers telling us?
Well, the report paints a clear picture of a market that's definitely on a solid upward path. Globally, the sales revenue for Smilagenin was clocked at $113.9 million back in 2021.
Okay, so a decent starting base.
And that's projected to climb to about $140 million pretty soon, by 2025.
Mhm.
And the momentum continues, expected to reach $211.6 million by 2033.
Wow. Okay, so crossing that $200 million mark, that means it's basically doubling in size, roughly, over about, 12 years? What kind of growth rate are we talking about?
Over that whole forecast period, the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, that's projected at 5.3%.
Right, CAGR. And just for context, that's like the average yearly growth if you reinvested everything.
Right.
So 5.3%.
Yeah.
It's not, like, mind-blowing, but it feels like really steady, reliable growth for a specific compound like this.
Precisely. It suggests that, sustained demand. It's not just some quick fad.
So what's actually pushing this growth? What are the core reasons the report gives for this consistent upward trend for Smilagenin?
It really points to two main things. The first is just the general, broader trend, rising demand for plant-based therapeutic agents overall. Consumers, manufacturers, they're increasingly looking to natural sources for health products, even medicines.
That totally tracks. We see that trend everywhere, right? Food, cosmetics. So it makes sense it's hitting pharmaceuticals and supplements too.
Absolutely. And the second key driver mentioned is the ongoing research into Smilagenin's specific properties. The report really highlights studies looking into its neuroprotective and cognitive enhancing potential.
Okay, now that's interesting because potential uses in brain health, cognitive function, that's a huge area, especially with aging populations and health priorities shifting. Does the report hint at what kind of applications this research might point towards?
It doesn't dive super deep into specific conditions, but yeah, the focus on neuroprotection and cognition suggests it could be relevant for things like age-related cognitive decline, maybe even supporting research into neurodegenerative conditions, or just, general brain health supplements for focus, memory, that kind of thing.
Right.
As that science gets stronger, it naturally fuels demand for the ingredient itself.
Okay, so we've got the big picture, steady global growth pushed by the plant-based movement and this really interesting research into brain benefits. But like you said, that global number hides a lot of variation, doesn't it? The report breaks it down regionally, and it sounds like the story is quite different depending on where you look.
Oh, definitely. The global trend is clear, but the speed and the sheer size of the market, very different across the world.
So let's start with the biggest player then. North America, the report says, had the largest share back in 2021.
That's right. North America came in at $47.5 million in 2021. It's projected to grow, hitting $80.8 million by 2033. That gives it a regional CAGR of about 4.5%. So solid growth, yeah, but actually a little slower than the global average.
Interesting. And within North America,
Yeah.
the U.S. is obviously the giant, but the report flags Mexico as growing faster. What's happening there?
Yeah, the U.S. market is the biggest chunk, growing steadily around 4.2% CAGR. Canada is also doing well, about 5.2%. But Mexico, yeah, it stands out with a projected 6.7% CAGR. The report specifically mentions emerging demand for herbal pharmaceuticals down there.
Ah, okay. That's a key detail. It suggests maybe a specific shift in healthcare preferences or maybe market access in Mexico that's boosting demand for ingredients like Smilagenin faster than its neighbors.
Exactly. It really shows how these local market conditions can create these pockets of faster growth.
Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. Europe, what's the picture there?
Europe's another major market. Revenues were around $32 million, a bit more, $32.3 million in 2021. That's projected to reach $57.8 million by 2033. So the regional CAGR there is 4.9%, a little bit faster than North America overall.
And the report points to the UK and Germany as big contributors in Europe. But are there any faster growers, any standouts like Mexico was for North America?
Yeah, actually, Spain gets a specific mention for faster growth within Europe. It's looking at a projected 6.4% CAGR. Countries like the UK, Germany, they're showing that steady growth, around 4 or 5%, similar to France, Italy, Russia too.
So Spain's growth is noticeably higher than the European average. Does the report give any clues why Spain might be pulling ahead like that?
It doesn't go into super fine detail for every single country, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But Spain's higher rate, well, it could be linked to maybe stronger consumer interest in natural health products, echoing that plant-based trend again, or perhaps specific things happening in their own nutraceutical market.
Got it. Okay, now let's turn to the region the report calls out as the real growth engine, Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
It says this is the fastest growing region globally.
It is, yeah. Asia Pacific is projected for a really robust 6.7% CAGR overall. It started at $26.4 million in 2021, and it's expected to hit $57.7 million by 2033, basically catching up to Europe in size.
And China and India get special mentions, leading the charge with high growth rates.
Absolutely. China's leading in terms of sheer dollar value. Projected growth is 7.2%.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
In terms of sheer dollar value, projected growth is 7.2% CAGR, so it's set to more than double its market size. But India is the real standout. If you look at the growth rate within the region, it's posting an impressive 8% CAGR.
8%? Okay, wow. That is significantly higher than the global average, or even China's rate. Why India specifically? Any insights?
The report points to India's, well, very strong integration of herbal medicines. It's deep in both their traditional systems and increasingly in modern health approaches too. That, combined with a huge population and, better access to health products, just creates this really fertile ground for growth for ingredients like Smilagenin.
Right.
China's scale and its own rising demand for natural products are also huge drivers, of course. And other places like Japan, South Korea, Australia, Southeast Asia, they're all contributing solid momentum too, with CAGRs mostly between 5.5% and 6.9%. Strong interest in botanical innovation across the board there.
It makes a lot of sense. Regions with that deep cultural history of using herbal medicine are now seeing rapid growth as these compounds get more modern research backing. What about South America?
South America is another interesting one. The report notes rising adoption of nutraceuticals and herbal products there too. Brazil is the biggest market size-wise, growing at around 6.3%.
Any fast-growing outliers there, like Spain or Mexico?
Yes. Colombia actually gets flagged as leading the regional CAGR race. It's projected at 7%. Countries like Argentina, Peru, Chile are also showing strong growth, somewhere between 5.9% and 7%. So yeah, that whole region seems to be really embracing natural product trends.
Okay, and finally, the Middle East and Africa. It's a smaller part of the global market, but any notable trends showing up?
It is a smaller segment, yeah, starting from a much lower base. But the report definitely indicates upward momentum. Egypt, for instance, is growing at a strong 6.8% CAGR. Turkey's also showing good growth, helped by rising pharmaceutical demand generally. And even the rest of the Middle East category shows steady growth, around 5.4%. It suggests there's this emerging interest in natural active pharmaceutical ingredients there too.
Okay, let's try and pull all this regional detail together, synthesize it a bit. What does this whole pattern tell us about the global Smilagenin market, beyond just the headline growth number?
Well, it paints a really clear picture, doesn't it? It's a market that's definitely advancing, but it has these really distinct regional personalities. You've got the mature markets, North America and Europe, providing that steady, reliable base of growth.
Yeah.
That's likely driven by established pharma and supplement industries, plus existing consumer awareness.
Right, but the real dynamism, the higher potential for expansion, that seems clearly concentrated in places like Asia Pacific and also parts of South America.
Exactly. That's where you see this confluence of factors. Large populations, rising incomes, that cultural acceptance of natural remedies we talked about, and maybe, potentially, evolving regulations around herbal formulations. All that's coming together to create significantly faster growth. And that's why countries like India, China, Mexico, Spain, Colombia, they stand out. They seem to be either early adopters or have specific market conditions right now that are just accelerating Smilagenin adoption compared to their neighbors.
It really underscores how these big global trends like the move to plant-based or the impact of scientific research, how they intersect with very local healthcare systems, traditions, and consumer preferences to create this, well, patchwork of growth rates and market opportunities.
And that raises a really interesting point for the future, you know? How will global supply chains and manufacturers adapt? They'll need to serve these different regions, some of which are growing much, much faster than others over the next decade.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive then. We've seen the global Smilagenin market is on a pretty solid growth path, expected to nearly double in value by 2033.
Yeah, driven fundamentally by that rising tide of interest in plant-based therapies, and importantly, that promising research into its potential brain health neuroprotective benefits.
And while North America and Europe are currently the biggest markets by size, the real standout growth, the engine, is clearly in Asia-Pacific, powered by giants like China and especially India in terms of rate, and also in specific fast-emerging markets elsewhere, like Mexico, Spain, and Colombia.
Those regional differences are absolutely key for anyone tracking the natural ingredient space. It's not a uniform picture at all.
So thinking about those core drivers again,
Yeah.
especially that cutting-edge research into neurological and maybe anti-aging applications, makes you wonder, doesn't it? Considering how quickly science can sometimes leap forward, how might future breakthroughs or even just wider awareness of the current research, how might that fundamentally reshuffle these regional growth patterns?
Yeah.
Or even push the whole market trajectory well beyond what this report is forecasting out to 2033?
That's the big question, isn't it? Definitely something to keep a close eye on. Welcome to the deep dive. We've gathered up the sources you sent our way, articles, research, notes, all that stuff, and yeah, we're ready to unpack them with you. Today, we are diving into Smilagenin. Now, if that name isn't one you hear every day, well, you're about to find out why it's actually becoming a compound of real interest. It comes from plants, like Smilax China. So our mission here is basically to sift through all this information you've shared, pull out the key bits about Smilagenin's market, its potential, therapeutically speaking.
Yeah, and looking through these sources, what really jumps out is how this compound, being natural, fits right into that massive trend we're seeing everywhere, people looking for plant-based health options.
Exactly. And it seems like it has potential in a few areas, but the material you sent really seems to focus in on cognitive health, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, like a lot of these ingredients moving from, say, traditional use into more modern science, it's facing some pretty big hurdles, too. So let's try and figure out, just based on this material, what's really driving the buzz around Smilagenin? What's kind of holding it back? And where does it seem to be heading? Okay, let's unpack this.
All right, so jumping right in, it's really clear from the sources that the biggest thing pushing Smilagenin forward is just this huge exploding demand globally for natural medicines, plant-derived stuff. People are actively looking for alternatives, especially, for chronic health things.
Yeah, and because Smilagenin is straight from plants, it kind of slots perfectly into that whole desire for ingredients people see as like clean, natural, maybe more sustainable. What specifically, according to the material, makes it appealing within that trend?
Well, okay, so beyond just being natural, the sources spend a lot of time on its potential in the neurocognitive space. That seems to be where the real excitement is building up.
Right, this is where it gets really interesting. The early preclinical research that's highlighted in these papers, it points to Smilagenin possibly enhancing memory and maybe even like stimulating the growth of new neurons.
That's it. That process neurogenesis, generating new brain cells well, research into doing that naturally is a super hot topic, especially thinking about conditions like Alzheimer's or frankly just age-related cognitive decline that worries a lot of people.
Okay.
So it kind of positions Smilagenin as this promising natural candidate in that whole field of nootropics, treatments aimed at boosting brain function.
So you've got this ingredient that ticks the natural box, which is huge, and it might offer help for something everyone worries about, brain health. What else, looking at the sources, is sort of driving its opportunity?
Well, the papers also mentioned the expansion of the global herbal pharmaceutical sector. As countries, especially places in Asia, Latin America, start to integrate regulated herbal products more into their actual healthcare systems, there's this push towards standardized plant-derived bioactive.
Bioactives, just the active compounds from plants, right?
Exactly. And Smilagenin, It has this history in traditional medicine, and now it's getting this emerging scientific interest. So it benefits directly from that trend.
Yeah.
It's seen as potentially a strategic ingredient, maybe with long-term commercial value in those markets.
Makes sense. That shift kind of creates a clearer path for botanicals, doesn't it? Moving from just traditional use to maybe validated.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Doesn't it? Moving from just traditional use to maybe validated medicines or supplements.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay, so strong market trends, exciting potential uses pushing Smilagenin forward, but the sources you sent are also really clear it's not an easy path.
Right.
What are the big hurdles? What's maybe the biggest one highlighted?
Without a doubt, the biggest thing you mentioned is the lack of comprehensive regulatory approval and, crucially, extensive human clinical validation. The preclinical stuff, in labs looks promising, but there's just a real shortage of large-scale trials and actual people to say, yes, this definitely works and it's safe.
And that gap, that lack of solid human data, that's a major barrier, isn't it? It really limits its ability to get into, say, formal pharma products, slows down regulators accepting it, especially, in North America, Europe, where the evidence bar is just really high.
Absolutely. And making that worse, another big hurdle they identify is just how complex and costly it is to actually get pure smilagenin out of the plants.
Mm-hmm.
The extraction process itself is apparently quite intricate.
Right.
And the yield, how much you actually get from the raw plant material, it's relatively low.
Oh, okay. And that naturally just drives up the cost of production.
Right.
Which makes it tough to scale up widely, especially maybe for smaller companies that don't have super sophisticated manufacturing setups.
Exactly. And then the third key thing the sources point to as a restraint is, simply a lack of awareness, both public and even among doctors or practitioners.
Yeah, it's not like curcumin or ashwagandha, right? Those names you hear all the time. Smilagenin hasn't really hit that broad recognition level yet.
Mm-hmm. And that limited familiarity, it kind of holds back demand.
Yeah.
Not just from, consumers browsing supplement aisles, but also even in the early stages, like in prescription drug development pipelines, especially in Western markets, where sometimes just recognizing the ingredient name can influence whether it gets picked up.
Okay, so we've covered what's giving it momentum and what's kind of standing in its way. Looking ahead now, the sources seem to outline some clear directions where Smilagenin might be heading. What emerging trends are popping up?
One area that's noticeable is its increasing use in anti-aging and sort of functional supplement categories.
That makes sense, doesn't it? Given some of the properties mentioned, like anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, maybe some hints of hormone modulation stuff, it seems like a natural fit for products focused on, vitality, healthy aging, maybe even skin health.
Exactly. Those wellness and cosmeceutical applications, they represent a really fast-growing market segment, especially at the sort of premium end.
And alongside that anti-aging angle, that focus on cognitive health and enhancement, that still seems to be a major driver for future research, right?
Definitely. With all the interest in optimizing memory, learning, brain plasticity, adaptability research institutions, biotech startups, they're actively looking at Smilagenin, seeing it as maybe a natural alternative or perhaps something to use alongside existing cognitive enhancers.
The sources also seem to stress how important strategic collaborations are for advancing these kinds of botanicals. And it looks like Smilagenin is part of that too.
Yeah, you see mentions of companies partnering up with universities, sometimes even with traditional medicine organizations, to work on developing more standardized formulations, plant-based products that have more solid evidence behind them.
And it was interesting to see that in places like China and India, where there's already some government support for herbal innovation, Smilagenin is specifically being looked at, evaluated as a candidate for future botanical drug pipelines.
Right. And those kinds of structured collaborations, they could be really key to maybe boosting its regulatory standing, figuring out how to scale production affordably, and ultimately just paving the way for it to be adopted more widely in the market.
They kind of provide the framework you need, right? To go from just promising traditional use and early lab data to something validated and ready for the market.
Exactly. That's the bridge.
So reflecting on all the sources you shared, it really paints this picture of Smilagenin as, a natural plant compound with some significant inherent potential. Its growing interest seems clearly fueled by that huge ongoing demand for natural health solutions worldwide, especially when you combine that with those really intriguing early findings around memory, neuron growth. things that have big implications for conditions like Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's definitely benefiting from the global expansion of the herbal pharma market too,
Yeah.
finding a footing, particularly it seems in Asia and Latin America, and it's being explored in those high growth areas, like you said, anti-aging, functional supplements.
But yeah, we absolutely cannot ignore those pretty significant speed bumps the source has highlighted. Primarily that lack of extensive large-scale human clinical trials
Right.
and the resulting hurdle of getting comprehensive regulatory approval.
That plus the tricky and costly extraction process and just the fact that its name recognition isn't quite there yet compared to botanical superstars like curcumin or ashwagandha, those are major constraints it still needs to overcome.
Yet the material does point towards some promising paths forward, like the focus on anti-aging and cognitive uses, and critically, the potential that could be unlocked by those strategic collaborations, maybe even government-backed research in some places, all aimed at, driving standardization and solidifying its place.
Yeah, overall, the sources seem to position Smilagenin as this potentially high-value ingredient. It seems poised for growth, potentially significant growth. But, and it's a big but, only if those key challenges around validating the science, scaling up production, and just increasing its visibility can actually be successfully tackled.
It is a fascinating journey, isn't it? Watching something go from traditional plant knowledge towards modern scientific investigation, given its history and this emerging science, what do you think it would really take for a compound like smilagenin to make that jump, to go from being a promising natural ingredient you read about in papers to something widely recognized, clinically validated, maybe even a therapeutic option people ask for? It's definitely something to think about.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.